Rain hammered the Manhattan sidewalk, turning Fifth Avenue into a blur of umbrellas and rushing bodies. Nora Bennett stood frozen outside the cafe where her interview was supposed to start in 5 minutes. Watching an elderly woman in a designer coat stumble against a lamppost 30 feet away, the woman looked lost, disoriented. Her silver hair plastered to her face. No umbrella. One hand pressed against the cold metal, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Everyone else walked past. Nora's phone buzzed. The library director waiting inside. This interview could save her atelier, pay 3 months of overdue rent, keep the lights on. But the woman swayed and something in Nora's chest pulled tight. She crossed the street without thinking. "Ma'am," Nora touched the woman's elbow gently. "Are you all right?" Pale blue eyes lifted to hers, confused and frightened. The woman's lips trembled. I don't... Nora stripped off her coat, wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. Rain soaked through her blouse immediately. "Let's get you somewhere warm. Do you know your address?" The woman blinked slowly, then nodded. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, fragile as old paper. 327 Park Avenue. Nora raised her arm, flagged a cab that almost didn't stop. She helped the woman inside, slid in beside her. The elderly woman was shaking, cold and scared, and Nora held her hand the entire 15-minute drive. When they pulled up to the limestone building with its uniformed doorman, the woman turned to her. Something had cleared in her eyes. Awareness, gratitude. "What's your name, dear?" "Nora Bennett." The woman repeated it softly, like a prayer. "Nora Bennett." She squeezed Nora's hand. "Thank you." Nora waited until the doorman had her safely inside before she told the driver to turn around. Her phone showed 6 missed calls. The interview was over, the position filled by someone else who'd actually shown up. She'd just sacrificed everything for a stranger in the rain. But when she closed her eyes that night, all she could see were those pale blue eyes, the relief flooding them when someone finally stopped. Some things mattered more than interviews. But how did we get here? Let me take you back. But before we do, if you believe love should see the person, not the titles, stay with me and hit that like button. Subscribe to Love and Light Stories for more stories like this. Now, let's continue. 1 week earlier, Adrian Westbrook stood in his office overlooking the Westbrook Auction House main gallery, watching crews prepare for next month's spring collection preview. 19th century landscapes lined the walls in perfect spacing. Everything measured, cataloged, authenticated, everything controlled. His reflection stared back from the window. 36 years of careful presentation. Charcoal suit tailored to precision. Dark hair styled with careful attention. The kind of face that appeared in art world magazines beside words like discerning and formidable. Empty words for an empty life. His phone lit up. His assistant's voice came through clipped and efficient. "Your mother's pre-op appointment is at 2. Dr. Morrison's office called to confirm. Adrian's jaw tightened. "I'll be there." He ended the call and stood there in the silence, surrounded by millions of dollars in art that meant nothing compared to the fear sitting cold in his chest. His mother was 71. The valve replacement was routine, they said. Low risk. But Eleanor Westbrook was the only person in his life who'd never wanted anything from him except his happiness. And the thought of losing her made the gallery walls feel like a cage. The door opened, his assistant stepped in, tablet in hand. The Bennett estate called again about the manuscript collection. "They're pushing for authentication this week. Tell them standard timeline, no exceptions." Adrian turned from the window and confirmed the board meeting for Thursday. Marcus Dashford wants to discuss the international expansion proposal again. Marcus is persistent. Marcus is ambitious. Adrian's tone went flat. He sees the Westbrook name as a stepping stone to a conglomerate sale. "My family built this house over 80 years. I won't let it become another acquisition for his portfolio." The assistant nodded and left. Adrian stood alone in his perfectly ordered office, master of a legacy that felt increasingly like a prison. Camilla's face flickered through his mind uninvited. The way she'd smiled at collectors while her hand rested on his arm, performing affection for an audience. The way she'd left him for Marcus's mentor, the moment a better connection appeared. People wanted his name, his network, his influence. No one had ever wanted just him. He checked his watch and headed for the door. His mother was waiting, and Eleanor Westbrook was the only thing in his life that still felt real. The day of the rain started with panic. Adrian's phone rang at 6:47 a.m. His mother's nurse, voice tight with worry. "Mr. Westbrook, your mother isn't in her room. She left the hospital sometime after midnight." "We've called security, but what do you mean she left?" Adrian was already pulling on clothes, phone pressed to his ear. "She's having surgery in 3 days. She's supposed to be monitored. She was agitated last night, scared about the procedure. We thought she'd settled, but..." Adrian didn't wait for the rest. He ended the call and ran. For 6 hours he searched, called every place she might go. Her apartment, the gallery, the park she loved. Nothing. His mother, disoriented and frightened, somewhere in Manhattan without her medication. His phone rang at 1:15 p.m. The doorman from her building, voice calm and steady. "Mr. Westbrook, your mother just arrived. She's safe. I'm 10 minutes away." Adrian's hands shook on the steering wheel. "Don't let her go anywhere, sir. She's not alone. There's a young woman with her. She brought your mother home in a taxi, stayed with her the whole way." Adrian's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. When he burst through the lobby 8 minutes later, he saw his mother first. Eleanor sat in one of the leather chairs by the fireplace, his coat draped over her shoulders, color returning to her face. The relief nearly dropped him to his knees. Then he saw the woman standing beside her. She was drenched, dark hair plastered to her face, simple blouse soaked through, no coat despite the freezing rain still hammering the windows. She held his mother's hand gently, speaking in a low voice that carried unexpected warmth. "You're safe now, Eleanor. Your son is coming." His mother looked up as Adrian approached, and her smile was soft and grateful. "Adrian, this is Nora. She found me." Nora straightened, and Adrian saw her clearly for the first time. Early 30s, delicate features, hazel eyes that held intelligence and kindness in equal measure. She looked exhausted and cold, but her attention stayed on his mother. Miss Adrian's voice came out rougher than intended. "Bennett. Nora Bennett." She released his mother's hand carefully. "I found her on 5th Avenue. She seemed disoriented, so I brought her home. Thank you." The words felt impossibly inadequate. "I've been looking everywhere. If you hadn't, anyone would have helped." Nora's voice was quiet but firm. She pulled a business card from her pocket, placed it in Eleanor's hand. "If you need anything, please call. I'm usually at my atelier." Eleanor's fingers closed around the card. "You missed something important for me, didn't you?" Nora's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nothing that can't be rescheduled." It was a lie. Adrian could hear it in her voice, see it in the tightness around her mouth. She'd sacrificed something significant to help a stranger, and she was pretending it didn't matter. "Let me pay you," Adrian said. "For the taxi, for your time." "No." The word came swift and absolute. "I didn't help her for money." She was already moving toward the door. Adrian realized he didn't even know how to thank someone who expected nothing in return. The concept felt foreign in his world of calculated exchanges. Nora paused at the entrance, looked back at his mother. "Take care of yourself, Eleanor. The surgery will go well. I know it." Then she was gone, disappearing into the rain before Adrian could find better words. Eleanor held up the card. "Nora Bennett, Book Restoration and Conservation. A Brooklyn address." She didn't ask who I was. Adrian didn't want anything. She just helped. Adrian took the card from his mother's hand, studied the simple design. Something uncomfortable twisted in his chest, unfamiliar and sharp. He'd just met someone who'd walked away from his money without a second thought. In his world, that was rarer than any painting in his gallery. 2 weeks later, Adrian stood in his mother's hospital room, watching her refuse physical therapy for the 3rd day in a row. The surgery had gone perfectly. The valve replacement was successful, prognosis excellent. But Eleanor sat in the chair by the window, staring at nothing, and wouldn't engage with the therapist trying to guide her through basic exercises. "Mrs. Westbrook, we need to build your strength." The therapist's patience was wearing thin. "Just 10 minutes today. I'm tired." Eleanor's voice was flat. "Tomorrow," she'd said tomorrow for 3 days. The therapist left with a concerned look that Adrian felt in his bones. He pulled a chair close to his mother, took her hand. "Mom, you have to do the work." The doctor said, "I know what they said." Eleanor's eyes stayed on the window. I just I can't seem to care. Fear wrapped around Adrian's throat. This wasn't his mother. Eleanor Westbrook had always been vibrant, engaged, curious about everything. This hollow exhaustion was wrong. He pulled out his wallet, found the business card that had been there for 2 weeks. Nora Bennett, the woman who'd helped without expecting anything. What if I brought someone to visit? Adrian kept his voice gentle. Someone you liked. Eleanor's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time in days, he saw a flicker of interest. The girl from the rain. Her name is Nora. She left her card in case you needed anything. She was kind. Eleanor's voice strengthened slightly. Really kind. Not performing, not trying to impress. Just good. Adrian made the call before he could overthink it. Nora answered on the 3rd ring, and he could hear classical music in the background, the sound of careful work. Nora Bennett. Miss Bennett, this is Adrian Westbrook. We met 2 weeks ago when you helped my mother. A pause, then her voice came warmer. How's Eleanor? The surgery went well, but Adrian stood, moved to the window so his mother couldn't hear. She's struggling with recovery. Depression, the doctors think. She won't engage with therapy, but she mentioned you, how kind you were. I'm glad the surgery was successful. I have an unusual request. Adrian chose his words carefully. Would you be willing to visit her? Spend some time keeping her company during recovery. I'd pay you, of course. Whatever rate seems fair. Silence stretched across the line. He could almost hear her thinking. I don't need payment for visiting someone. Nora's voice held gentle firmness. If Eleanor wants company, I'm happy to come. This would be more than occasional visits. Daily, possibly for several weeks. It would take considerable time. Adrian kept his tone professional. I'm asking you to work, Miss Bennett. Please let me compensate you appropriately. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. My atelier rent is 3 months overdue. I lost a contract that would have covered it. If you're serious about paying, I need the work. The honesty surprised him. No negotiation, no playing games. Just truth. Come tomorrow, Adrian said. We'll discuss terms. He ended the call and returned to his mother's side. Eleanor was watching him with the first real expression he'd seen in days. You called her, I did. Adrian squeezed her hand. She's coming tomorrow for the first time since surgery. His mother smiled. Nora arrived at the hospital room, carrying a canvas bag and wearing a simple navy dress that looked like it had been carefully mended near the hem. Adrian watched from the doorway as she approached his mother's chair, and Eleanor's face transformed. Nora, his mother reached out both hands. You came? Of course I did. Nora took Eleanor's hands gently, then settled into the chair beside her. Your son said you could use some company. I'm being difficult. Eleanor's admission came with surprising ease. The therapists think I'm depressed. Are you? I'm scared. Eleanor's voice dropped. What if the surgery fails? What if I go through all this and it doesn't work? Nora didn't offer platitudes. She just listened, and Adrian saw his mother's shoulders gradually relax. I brought something. Nora reached into her bag, pulled out a leather-bound book with gilt edges. It's a collection of romantic poetry. First edition, 1847. I'm restoring it for a client, but I thought, would you like to hear some while I work? Eleanor's eyes lit up. You restore books. Old ones, damaged ones. Books that people think are beyond saving. Nora's smile was soft. I like proving them wrong. She opened the book carefully, began reading Wordsworth in a voice that carried the rhythm of the verses, like music. Adrian stood in the doorway watching his mother lean forward, engaged for the first time in days. Nora's hands moved over the book's damaged spine as she read, gentle and sure. She explained the process between stanzas, pointing out places where the binding had failed, where pages had torn, how she'd repair each section while preserving the original structure. You have to respect what it was, Nora said, while giving it strength to continue. Eleanor reached out, touched the book's cover with reverence. That's beautiful. It's what you're doing too. Nora met his mother's eyes. Physical therapy is restoration, building strength while honoring what your body has been through, Adrian. Watched his mother's expression shift. Recognition, understanding. Will you stay? Eleanor's question came quiet but hopeful. While I do therapy, I think I could manage if you were here. I'd love to. When the physical therapist returned, Eleanor stood without protest. Nora sat in the corner reading poetry aloud, and his mother worked through every exercise, determination replacing the hollow exhaustion. Later, after Eleanor had fallen asleep, Adrian walked Nora to the elevator. "Thank you." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This covers 2 weeks at the rate we discussed." Nora took it, and he saw her hands tremble slightly. Relief, she needed this money desperately. But she'd still offered to visit for free. "Your mother is wonderful," Nora said. "Intelligent, thoughtful. She just needed a reason to fight. You gave her that." Adrian pressed the elevator button. "Would you be willing to continue? Daily visits during her recovery?" "Yes," no hesitation. The elevator arrived. Nora stepped inside, turned to face him. In the fluorescent light, he could see the careful patches on her dress, the worn edges of her bag. She was struggling, but she'd helped his mother with the same care she'd give a queen character, he thought. This was what character looked like. The doors closed, and Adrian stood there longer than necessary, thinking about a woman who restored broken things with gentle hands and refused to let them stay damaged. 3 weeks into Nora's daily visits, Eleanor's recovery had transformed. She completed therapy without complaint, laughed during Nora's readings, asked questions about book restoration with genuine curiosity. The doctors were impressed. Adrian arrived at the hospital one afternoon to find his mother and Nora in deep discussion about a manuscript Nora was examining. 15th century, Nora was saying, wearing white conservation gloves as she turned pages carefully, illuminated by Flemish monks. "Look at the gold leaf detail on the capital letters." Eleanor leaned closer, fascinated. "How do you authenticate something this old?" "Pigment analysis, paper composition, binding techniques." Nora pointed to a margin illustration, but also historical context. "This prayer book references a monastery that burned in 1487, so we know it predates that event." Adrian stepped into the room. "You brought medieval manuscripts to a hospital." Nora looked up, and something flickered across her face when she saw him. Awareness. She'd been visiting for weeks, but they'd barely spoken beyond logistics. The client needed preliminary assessment. Nora's voice stayed professional. "I thought Eleanor might enjoy seeing it." "I do." His mother's enthusiasm was clear. "Nora's been teaching me about conservation. Did you know she can identify paper origin by texture alone?" "I didn't." Adrian moved closer, looked at the manuscript. The detail was extraordinary. Each illuminated letter a masterpiece in miniature. "What's it worth?" "Depends on authentication and condition." Nora turned a page with infinite care. "Properly restored, somewhere between 2 and 3 million. The number was stated without fanfare, just fact. Adrian studied her face, seeing the concentration there, the respect for the work in her hands. She handled a $3 million manuscript with the same gentle attention she'd given his mother in the rain. "Nora says the Westbrook has an illuminated manuscript collection." Eleanor looked at her son. "She'd love to see it someday." "Would you?" Adrian asked. Nora met his eyes. "Your family's collection is legendary. The 1450 book of ours alone. I've only seen photographs come by the gallery next week." The invitation came before he could think. "I'll arrange private access." Her face lit up, genuine delight replacing professional composure. "Really, really?" And Adrian felt something unexpected in his chest. Warmth, satisfaction at making her smile. His mother was watching them both, with an expression he couldn't quite read. That evening, after Nora left and Eleanor was settled for the night, his mother took his hand. "She's special. Adrian. She's been good for your recovery." "I'm not talking about my recovery." Eleanor's grip tightened. "When was the last time you looked at someone the way you looked at her this afternoon?" "I barely looked at her. Exactly my point," his mother's smile was knowing. "You're trying not to." Adrian pulled his hand free gently. "She's an employee, Mom. A professional contact. She's a woman who helped a stranger in the rain without asking for anything. Who spends her days restoring beautiful, broken things. Who makes you forget to look at your watch every 5 minutes." Eleanor's voice softened. "Don't pretend you haven't noticed." He had noticed. The way Nora's eyes crinkled when she laughed at his mother's stories. How she chewed her lower lip when concentrating on delicate repair work. The quiet intelligence in everything, she said. But he'd also noticed how carefully she avoided his attention. How she positioned herself always at his mother's side, never his. She was here for Eleanor. The money let her keep her atelier, and his mother's company gave her joy. She didn't want him, and after Camilla, That was probably safer for everyone. 1 week later, Eleanor was discharged with orders for home recovery. Adrian had prepared the penthouse guest room, hired nursing staff, arranged everything for her comfort. What he hadn't prepared for was his mother's request. "I want Nora to stay here." Eleanor sat in the limousine, taking them home, her tone brooking no argument. "In the penthouse, not just visiting Mom. She has her own place in Brooklyn. She told me about her atelier. It's a 45-minute subway ride each direction." Eleanor fixed him with the look that had made him confess to breaking windows at age 12. "If she's coming daily for 6 more weeks, she should have the guest room. It's practical. Practical." His mother had never been practical about anything in her life. "I'll ask her." Adrian kept his voice neutral. Nora arrived that evening as they were settling Eleanor into the penthouse. She stopped in the entrance, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The original artwork on the walls, the grand piano in the corner. She seemed at a loss for words. "Excessive," Adrian offered. "Beautiful," Nora turned slowly, taking it in. "Like a museum. Sometimes it feels like one." The words came out before he could stop them. Perfectly curated and empty. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe recognition. Eleanor appeared from the hallway. "Nora, come see the library." "Adrian, show her the library." The library occupied the entire west wing. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, rolling ladder, rare editions protected behind glass. Adrian watched Nora's face transform. She moved to the nearest shelf like someone approaching an altar. Her fingers hovered over the spines without touching. That's a first edition? Austen, Pride and Prejudice. 1813. Adrian moved beside her. "My grandmother collected them, and that's Dickens. First edition, Great Expectations." Nora's voice dropped to a whisper. "You have the original serial publication. You recognize it from the spine. I've restored 3 copies." She turned to him, eyes bright. "Do you know what you have here? Books. History, legacy, voices from 200 years ago preserved perfectly." She gestured to the shelves, each one a conversation across time. Adrian found himself smiling. "My mother said you'd appreciate this." "Appreciate?" Nora laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. This is extraordinary." Eleanor appeared in the doorway. "So you'll stay. Use the guest room." "I'd feel so much better knowing you were close." Nora's expression shifted. "Mrs. Westbrook, I couldn't possibly call me Eleanor, please." "And you absolutely could." His mother moved into the room. "Adrian, tell her it's practical." He met Nora's eyes, saw the hesitation there. "It would be easier than commuting. The guest room has its own bathroom, plenty of privacy. You'd be helping my mother feel secure during recovery." And Eleanor added with satisfaction, "You'd have unlimited access to the library." Adrian barely reads. Someone should enjoy it. Nora looked between them, and Adrian could see her weighing options. Pride against practicality. Need against propriety. "The atelier rent is paid for the month," she said finally. "I suppose I could stay until Eleanor's fully recovered." "Wonderful." Eleanor clapped her hands. Adrian helped Nora collect her things from Brooklyn tomorrow. That night, after Nora had gone to get clothes from her apartment, Adrian stood in the library alone. He pulled the Austen from the shelf, opened it carefully. The pages smelled of age and care, and on the inside cover, his grandmother's name was written in fading ink. Nora had known what this was from 10 feet away. She'd seen value he'd walked past for years without noticing. His phone buzzed. Marcus Ashford requesting a meeting about the expansion proposal. Adrian ignored it and returned the book to its shelf. For the first time in months, his home didn't feel quite so much like a museum. Late March evening, 3 weeks after Nora moved into the penthouse, Adrian came home from the gallery to find Eleanor asleep in her room, and soft light coming from the library. Nora sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by books. She'd changed from her usual professional dress into worn jeans and an oversized sweater, dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, utterly absorbed in the volume open across her lap. "Find something interesting." Adrian loosened his tie. She looked up, startled. "I'm sorry I didn't hear you come in. Eleanor went to bed early, and I thought she gestured at the books. I got carried away. What are you reading?" "Letters." Nora's face glowed with enthusiasm. "Your grandmother kept correspondence with artists, writers, Collectors. It's all here tucked into the books she bought. Look, she held up a folded paper, yellowed with age. This is from a dealer in Paris, 1952. He's describing a Matisse he thinks she'd love. And his handwriting, she traced the elegant script. It's beautiful. Adrian sat on the floor beside her, close enough to see the letter. Close enough to smell whatever subtle perfume she wore, something like old books and rain. My grandmother died when I was 12. He took the letter carefully. I barely remember her, she had wonderful taste. Nora pulled another book from the pile and she wrote in the margins. Look, she's having a conversation with Wordsworth. Adrian leaned closer, saw his grandmother's neat annotations beside the printed verses. Observations, questions, arguments with the poet across a century and a half. She was brilliant. Nora's voice carried reverence. You can see her mind working through the text. They sat there on the library floor for 2 hours, going through his grandmother's collection, reading her notes, unfolding letters. Nora explained the significance of certain additions, pointed out repairs that had been done well versus poorly, shared stories about similar manuscripts she'd restored. At some point, Adrian realized they'd moved closer, their shoulders nearly touching, heads bent over the same book. He could feel the warmth of her beside him, hear the soft catch in her breath when she found something particularly beautiful. This one, Nora opened a slim volume of Keith's second edition, 1820. Look at the inscription. Adrian read his grandmother's handwriting on the inside cover. For the moments when beauty is the only truth that matters. EMW, she understood Nora's fingers, traced the words gently. That sometimes you need beauty just to survive. Something in her voice made Adrian look at her face instead of the book. In the lamplight, he could see the tiredness there, the worry she usually hid well. Is that why you restore books for beauty? I restore them because they deserve to continue. Nora closed the Keats carefully. Because someone loved them once, poured their heart into creating them. And they shouldn't just disappear. Is that what happened to your atelier contract? It disappeared. She met his eyes, surprised by the question. The library that hired me closed budget cuts. They sold their collection to a private dealer who didn't need a restorer. I'm sorry these things happen, but her voice betrayed the loss. I loved that work. Not for the money though, that helped. For the books themselves, giving them another century, Adrian understood suddenly. This wasn't just a job for her. It was purpose, mission. Love made tangible through careful hands and patient hours. My ex-fiancé collected art, he heard himself say. But she never looked at it the way you look at these books. Nora's gaze sharpened. How did she look at it? Like inventory. Assets. Things to photograph for social media. Adrian picked up another volume, turned it in his hands. She left me for someone with a better collection. Then she was an idiot. The blunt assessment startled a laugh from him. You don't know that. I know you preserve your grandmother's letters in her books. I know you hired me to help your mother. Not because you needed my work, but because she needed company. Nora's voice was firm. I know you notice when the night staff looks tired and you send them home early. You think I don't see that. He hadn't realized she was watching. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time. Nora stood, started gathering books. Your ex-fiancé was an idiot, and you're better off without her. Adrian rose, helped her return volumes to their shelves. Their hands brushed, reaching for the same space, and the contact sent electricity up his arm. Nora pulled back quickly. It's late. I should. Nora, her name stopped her at the doorway. She turned, and in the lamplight she looked beautiful. Not polished or performed. Just real. Thank you for this. For showing me my grandmother. Her smile was soft and genuine. She left you treasures. I'm glad you're seeing them now. She disappeared down the hall, and Adrian stood alone in the library, surrounded by his grandmother's legacy and the lingering scent of rain and old paper. He was falling for her. The realization settled over him with uncomfortable certainty. Nora Bennett, who fixed broken things and refused his money, and made his empty penthouse feel like a home. And she was here for his mother, not him. The timing couldn't be worse. The dinner party was Eleanor's idea, sprung on Adrian with 48 hours' notice. Just a small gathering. His mother sat in the library where she'd regained strength over 6 weeks of recovery. The board members you trust, a few old friends. We'll celebrate my health. Mom, you're still recovering. I'm recovered. Eleanor's tone was final. Dr. Morrison cleared me completely, and I want people to see I'm well. Especially before Marcus starts spreading rumors about my competency. Adrian's jaw tightened. Marcus had been making noise about Eleanor's diminished capacity to guide family business after her surgery. Board politics at their ugliest. Fine, small gathering. Saturday evening, what he didn't anticipate was his mother insisting Nora attend. She's been my companion for 2 months, Eleanor said when he protested. She should meet people who matter to this family. Saturday arrived with catering, staff, and 12 guests, including 3 board members. Adrian wore the charcoal suit his mother preferred, checked his reflection, and tried not to think about how Nora would handle a room full of Manhattan's art world elite. He needn't have worried. She appeared in the doorway wearing a simple black dress, her hair swept up, pearl earrings that had probably belonged to her grandmother. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. But she held herself with quiet dignity that made every overpriced designer gown in the room look desperate. Adrian watched Marcus Ashford's eyes track her across the room, calculating and predatory. The evening progressed through cocktails and appetizers. Adrian made introductions, kept conversation flowing, monitored his mother's energy, but part of his attention stayed on Nora, watching how she navigated the social terrain. It was magnificent. When Bernard Chen, senior board member and art collector, asked about her work, she explained book restoration with passion but without pretension. When Margaret Sutton tried to trap her with questions about provenance authentication, Nora held her ground with expertise that surprised the older woman into respect. And when Marcus cornered her near the Rothko, Adrian moved closer to listen. So you're the young woman caring for Eleanor. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. How fortunate for you, finding such a generous employer. I've been fortunate in Eleanor's friendship. Nora's voice stayed level. Friendship. Marcus sipped his scotch. Is that what we're calling it? Adrian stepped between them before he could think. Marcus, I believe Bernard wanted to discuss the authentication protocols. Marcus's gaze moved from Nora to Adrian, something knowing in his expression. Of course, though I'm curious about your companion's expertise. Nora, was it? What do you think of Adrian's Rothko? It was a trap. The painting had been questioned by some critics, and Marcus knew it. Nora studied the canvas for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried quiet confidence. I think it's extraordinary. The color composition, the way the orange seems to float above the red. It's either genuine brilliance or a masterful fake. And frankly, either possibility is worth the price. Margaret Sutton laughed, genuine and surprised. Well said. Marcus's smile tightened. You have unusual opinions for a book restorer. I have eyes. Nora met his gaze without flinching. And I trust them. Adrian felt something fierce and protective surge in his chest. She'd just put Marcus in his place with grace and intelligence, and she didn't even realize it. Later, after guests had departed and Eleanor had retired, Adrian found Nora in the library, pulling pins from her hair. You were incredible tonight. He leaned against the doorframe. She looked up surprised. I was terrified. You hit it perfectly. Your mother's friend. Margaret offered me work. Nora's smile was slightly dazed. She has a private collection that needs assessment. Real work, Adrian. Months of guaranteed contracts. Joy for her ward with something darker. She wouldn't need his mother's companionship anymore. Wouldn't need to stay in the penthouse. Wouldn't need him. That's wonderful. He forced enthusiasm into his voice. Eleanor arranged it. Nora set the pins on the table. She's been showing Margaret photos of my restorations for weeks. She's been helping me. Her eyes filled with tears and she looked away quickly. I'm sorry, it's just, no one's done that for me in so long. Adrian crossed the room before he could think. Stood close enough to see her shoulders trembling. Nora, she looked up. And he saw vulnerability there. Raw and real. The professional composure stripped away, leaving just the woman who'd helped a stranger in the rain because it was right. His hand lifted to her face, thumb brushing her cheek. Her skin was soft, warm. She didn't pull away. Thank you, she whispered, for letting me be here for your mother. For this, he should step back. Should maintain professional distance. Should remember that she was leaving soon. That she'd never shown interest in him. That getting close to someone again was asking to be heard. But she was crying, and she was beautiful. And he was tired of pretending he didn't feel this. Nora, her name came out rough. I need to tell you something. She waited, hazel eyes wide and trusting. Before he could speak, Eleanor's voice called from the hallway. Adrian, is Nora still up? I need her help with something. The moment shattered. Nora stepped back quickly, wiping her eyes. I should go. Eleanor needs me. She was gone before he could find the words he'd been about to say. Adrian stood alone in the library, his hands still warm from touching her face, and tried to remember why falling for her was a terrible idea. He couldn't think of a single reason that mattered. The next morning started with crisis. Eleanor's nurse found Adrian in his office at the gallery. Mr. Westbrook, your mother collapsed during breakfast. We've called an ambulance. Terror turned his blood to ice. I'm coming. He made the drive to the penthouse in 8 minutes, burst through the door to find paramedics checking Eleanor's vitals. Nora knelt beside his mother, holding her hand, face pale with fear. What happened? Adrian dropped to his knees. She stood up too quickly. The lead paramedic continued his assessment. Blood pressure dropped. Likely vasovagal response, but we're taking her in for observation. They loaded Eleanor into the ambulance. She was conscious, protesting weakly that she was fine. Adrian started to climb in after her. Both of you come. Eleanor reached for Nora, please. They rode to the hospital together. Nora pressed against the ambulance wall, Eleanor's hand gripped tight in hers. Adrian watched them both, saw the terror Nora couldn't hide. She loves my mother, he realized. Not for the money, not for the connections. She genuinely loves her. At the hospital, tests revealed exactly what the paramedics suspected. Orthostatic hypotension, common post-surgery, nothing dangerous. But Eleanor needed to stay overnight for monitoring. I'm not leaving. Nora pulled a chair to Eleanor's bedside. Neither am I. Adrian took the other side. Eleanor looked between them, and despite her exhaustion, she smiled. My 2 stubborn children, they stayed through the afternoon as Eleanor slept. Nora read poetry in soft tones. Adrian handled gallery business on his phone. The room felt peaceful, intimate, like a family. Evening came, a nurse brought dinner trays. Eleanor picked at her food while Nora encouraged her to eat, and Adrian felt something in his chest crack open, watching them together. Adrian, dear. His mother set down her fork. Would you get me ice cream from the cafeteria? Chocolate? They never bring enough. He knew a dismissal when he heard one. Of course, the cafeteria was on the 2nd floor. He took his time, giving his mother whatever private conversation she wanted with Nora, when he returned 20 minutes later with 3 containers of chocolate ice cream. Eleanor was asleep, and Nora stood at the window, shoulders shaking. Adrian set down the ice cream. What did she say? Nora turned, tears streaming down her face. She said I'm the daughter she never had. That finding me in the rain was the best thing that ever happened to her. Adrian crossed to her without thinking, pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, buried her face against his shoulder, and let herself break. I don't have anyone, she whispered against his shirt. My parents are gone, no siblings. I've been alone for so long. And Eleanor, her voice cracked. She makes me feel like I belong somewhere. His arms tightened around her. She fit perfectly against him, like she'd been designed for this space. He could feel her heart beating, fast and frightened, could smell that scent of rain and old paper that was uniquely hers. You do belong. The words came from somewhere deep and honest. You belong with her. With us. Nora pulled back enough to look at his face. Her eyes were red, hazel darkened to brown by tears. Adrian, his name on her lips, felt like a question and an answer. He cupped her face in both hands, thumbs brushing away tears. Her breathing hitched. The air between them felt electric, charged with everything they hadn't said. I'm falling for you. The confession escaped before he could stop it. I've been falling since the night in the library. Maybe since the day you brought my mother home in the rain. I know you're not interested. I know this is complicated, but I can't. She kissed him. It was soft and desperate and perfect. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Adrian forgot every reason this was a terrible idea. She tasted like tears and hope, and when she made a small sound against his mouth, he felt it in his bones. They broke apart slowly. Nora's eyes were wide, shocked by her own boldness. I thought you didn't want this, Adrian whispered, forehead pressed to hers. You've been so careful to avoid me. I've been terrified. Her voice shook. You're Adrian Westbrook. You live in penthouses, and own galleries, and date sophisticated women. I'm nobody. I fix old books in a Brooklyn atelier that I can barely afford. Why would you want me? Because you're real. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. Because you see beauty in damaged things, and you help strangers without asking for anything. Because you make my mother laugh, and you argued with Wordsworth in your head, and you think my ex-fiancé was an idiot. Nora laughed, the sound watery but genuine. She was an idiot. I love you. The words felt right leaving his mouth. True. I think I've loved you since you walked away from my money that first day. I love you too. Nora's fingers traced his jawline. I've been trying so hard not to. It seemed impossible. Nothing's impossible. Adrian kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the feel of her. We'll figure it out together. A sound from the bed made them both turn. Eleanor was awake, watching them with unconcealed delight. Finally, his mother's voice was weak, but satisfied. I was wondering how long you two would dance around this. Nora's face flushed crimson. Eleanor, I'm sorry, we shouldn't have nonsense. You should have weeks ago. Eleanor gestured them closer. Both of you, come here. They approached the bed together. Eleanor took their hands, placed Nora's and Adrian's, covered them both with her own. You take care of each other, she said firmly. That's an order. Adrian looked at Nora. She was smiling through fresh tears, beautiful and real. And his, yes ma'am, he said. This was what love looked like, not performance or transaction, just truth. 3 days later, disaster struck. Adrian was in a meeting with the board when his assistant knocked urgently. Sir, you need to see this. The gossip blog was already trending. Photos of Adrian and Nora at the hospital, embracing, kissing. The headline made his blood run cold. Westbrook heirs calculated romance. Book restores Rain rescue a setup. The article, clearly fed by someone with inside knowledge, laid out a damning narrative. Nora had happened to find Eleanor in the rain, positioned herself as savior, accepted money to become companion, seduced the son, and now stood to gain everything. It's Marcus. Adrian's voice was dead calm. He's trying to discredit me before the expansion vote. His assistant's face was grim. It's working. The board's already talking. And there's more. The second article included an interview with the library director Nora had missed meeting the day she helped Eleanor. She was desperate for work, the woman said. Practically begged for the position. Then she noshed her interview. I wondered what could be more important than a job she needed so badly. Now we know. She found something better. Adrian's hands clenched into fists. They were twisting everything, making Nora's kindness look like calculation, her love look like opportunism. His phone rang. Eleanor, her voice frantic. Adrian Nora saw the articles. She's packing. You have to stop her. He ran. The penthouse was chaos when he arrived. Nora throwing clothes into a bag, tears streaming down her face, Eleanor trying to reason with her from the doorway. Nora, stop. Adrian caught her wrist. She jerked away. Don't touch me. Don't. They think I used your mother. They think I planned this. I don't care what they think, I care. Her voice broke. They're saying I manipulated a sick woman, that I'm a gold digger and a liar. They're destroying everything true between us. Then we fight back. We tell the truth. The truth, Nora laughed bitterly. The truth is, I needed money, and you paid me to spend time with your mother. How does that look in print? Adrian's chest felt like it was being crushed. It looks like I recognized someone special, and found a way to keep her in our lives. It looks like I sold myself. Nora wiped her eyes roughly. And maybe I did. Maybe I'm exactly what they say. Stop. He grabbed her shoulders, made her look at him. You helped a stranger in the rain because it was right. Everything else followed from that moment of pure kindness. Don't let them rewrite history. I can't do this. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I can't be the reason people question your character or your mother's judgment. I won't let my presence damage what you've built. Nora, let me go, Adrian. She pulled free, grabbed her bag. It's better this way. Cleaner. You'll release a statement saying I deceived you. The board will be satisfied and your mother will understand eventually. I won't do that, then I will. Nora moved toward the door. I'll hold a press conference. Say I took advantage of Eleanor's kindness, that everything was calculated. Give them the villain they want. No. Eleanor's voice rang out, surprisingly strong. Nora Bennett, you will do no such thing. Nora turned, and Adrian saw the devastation on her face. I love you, Eleanor, both of you. That's why I have to leave. She was gone before either of them could stop her. Adrian started after her, but his mother's hand caught his arm. Let her go, Mom. She needs time to breathe, to think clearly. And you need to fix this mess. Eleanor's eyes blazed with determination. Marcus Ashford did this. Prove it. Then get my daughter back. Our daughter, Adrian thought. His mother had already claimed Nora as family. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. If Marcus wanted war, Adrian would give him one. 2 weeks passed in silent agony. Adrian threw himself into investigating the leaks, tracing the gossip blog sources, building his case against Marcus. He barely slept, barely ate. The penthouse felt tomb-like without Nora's presence. Her books left half restored on the library table, like abandoned hope. Eleanor grew quieter each day, the spark that Nora had reignited, gradually dimming. Have you found her? His mother asked every morning. Not yet. Adrian had tried Nora's atelier a dozen times. Always locked, no answer. She'd gone to ground completely. Then Margaret Sutton called with information. I hired Nora for that restoration project, remember? She's been working from her Brooklyn studio. Won't answer calls, but she's there. And Adrian, Margaret's voice softened. She looks destroyed. Whatever happened between you, fix it. Adrian stood outside the Brooklyn atelier at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, rain beginning to fall. Through the window, he could see light, and his heart lurched. He knocked. Silence, then footsteps. The door opened 6 inches. Nora stood there in paint-stained work clothes, hair in a messy bun, eyes red-rimmed. She looked thin, exhausted, beautiful. Adrian, his name came out broken. Can I come in? She hesitated, then stepped back. The atelier was small, cramped, filled with the tools of her trade. Works in progress covered every surface. The smell of leather and paper and chemicals hung in the air. It was perfect, utterly her, and Adrian felt like he was seeing her soul laid bare. You shouldn't be here. Nora didn't meet his eyes. The press doesn't matter. None of it matters. Adrian moved closer. I found proof that Marcus fed those stories. His assistant gave a statement. The board has the evidence. He's being removed. Nora's eyes lifted. What? He tried to destroy you to get to me, but he underestimated how many people actually know your character. Adrian pulled out his phone, showed her the statement from the library director. She recanted her interview, said she was pressured by Marcus, that she'd actually called you to apologize the day after you missed the meeting, that you'd explained about helping someone in danger. She called. Nora's voice was barely audible. I never answered. The doorman from my mother's building gave a statement that described how you'd arrived, soaked and shivering, how you'd refused any reward, how my mother kept your card because you'd restored her faith in kindness. Adrian set down his phone. Even Bernard Chen wrote a character reference. You spent 20 minutes at that dinner party discussing Provenance with him, and he called you refreshingly brilliant. Nora sank into a chair, overwhelmed. I don't understand. They saw what I saw. Who you really are. Adrian knelt before her, took her hands. I'm sorry I let you leave. Sorry I didn't fight harder to make you stay. I was trying to respect your choice, but all I did was lose 2 weeks I could have spent loving you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. They said such horrible things. They were wrong. He kissed her knuckles. You are the woman who helped the stranger in the rain, who brought my mother back to life with poetry and patience, who sees beauty in broken things and refuses to let them stay damaged. That's the truth. That's all that matters. I missed you. The confession came with a sob. I missed both of you so much. Then come home. Adrian cupped her face. My mother hasn't smiled in 2 weeks. The penthouse is empty without you. I'm empty without you. What about the board? Your reputation secure. Marcus is gone. The expansion is approved. And the board's seen the truth about us. Adrian smiled slightly. Bernard suggested we make the engagement real. Said it would be good optics. And also, you're the only person who's ever made me laugh during a meeting. Nora's eyes widened. Engagement. Hypothetical engagement. But Adrian's heart was racing. Though if you wanted to make it real, I would be. She kissed him hard, desperate and hungry. Her hands fisted in his jacket, pulling him close. And Adrian fell into her like coming home. They broke apart gasping. Yes, Nora whispered. Real engagement. Real everything. I love you. I love you too. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth again. Come home with me right now. My mother needs to see you're okay. Nora pulled back slightly. I need to finish this restoration first. It's due tomorrow, and I promised Margaret I'll help. Adrian shrugged off his jacket. Tell me what to do. They worked through the night, side by side in her tiny atelier. Adrian learned to mix adhesives under her careful instruction, held pages steady while she repaired binding, listened as she explained every step with patient expertise. Dawn found them finishing the last touches, exhausted and covered in leather dust and perfectly happy. Ready? Adrian asked. Nora looked around her atelier, then back at him. I'm ready. They took a car to Manhattan, arrived at the penthouse at 8 a.m. Eleanor was having breakfast alone at the dining table, and when she looked up and saw Nora, her face transformed. You're back. Eleanor stood on shaking legs. I'm back. Nora crossed to her, and they held each other tight, both crying. I'm sorry I left. I'm so sorry. Don't you dare apologize. Eleanor pulled back, cupped Nora's face. You're my daughter. You don't leave family. Adrian watched them, his mother and the woman he loved, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was right. This was real. Eleanor looked at her son over Nora's shoulder. Well, are you going to do this properly or not? Adrian pulled the ring box from his pocket. He'd bought it 2 days after Nora left. A simple emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. Book restoration required careful hands, so nothing that would catch on pages. He knelt before Nora as his mother stepped aside, smiling through tears. Nora, Bennett, Adrian opened the box. You found my mother in the rain and brought her home. You restored my empty life with beauty and truth. You're the most real thing I've ever known. Will you marry me? Really? Not hypothetically. Nora looked at the ring at him, at Eleanor beaming nearby. Yes, really, not hypothetically. Forever, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, stood and kissed her, while his mother applauded. This was the truth. The only truth that mattered. Love looked like a woman who stopped in the rain for a stranger. And love looked like a man who finally learned to see what was real. 6 months later, on a clear October afternoon, Nora Bennett married Adrian Westbrook in the atelier, where they'd first worked side by side through the night. It was small, intimate, exactly what they wanted. Eleanor sat in the front row, healthy and radiant, holding the book of hours that Nora had restored as a gift. Margaret Sutton attended with Bernard Chen and several other board members who'd become friends. The doorman from Eleanor's building was there, and the nurse who'd helped during recovery, and the librarian who'd recanted her statement. People who knew who they really were. Nora wore a simple cream dress and held wildflowers. Adrian couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him through the space filled with the books she loved. The work that defined her, the life she'd built with careful hands. Ready? The officiant asked. I've been ready since the rain, Adrian said. They spoke their vows in front of half-restored manuscripts and ancient texts, promising to honor the beauty in broken things, to see truth beyond surface, to love with the same fearless kindness that had brought them together. When Adrian kissed his wife, Eleanor wiped away happy tears. The reception was held at the gallery, surrounded by art and light and legacy. Eleanor gave a toast that had everyone crying, talking about the day a stranger helped her and changed everything. My son found his purpose, she said, raising her glass. And I found my daughter. All because Nora Bennett has a heart that sees people, not positions. Later, as the evening wound down, Adrian found Nora in front of his grandmother's book of hours, now beautifully displayed in the gallery's permanent collection. Your grandmother would have loved this, Nora said softly, seeing her treasures shared. She would have loved you. Adrian wrapped his arms around her from behind. The woman who gives broken beautiful things another century. Nora leaned back against him. I restored a book today. 18th century poetry, spine completely destroyed. The owner thought it was beyond saving, and I proved them wrong. She turned in his arms, smiled up at him. That's what we do. We prove them wrong about what can be saved. Adrian kissed her, slow and deep, surrounded by his grandmother's legacy and the future they were building together. Always 3 years later. They stood in that same gallery for the opening of the Westbrook Conservation Wing. Nora's dream made real. a state-of-the-art restoration facility attached to the auction house, training the next generation of conservators while saving beautiful broken things. Eleanor cut the ribbon, 80 years old and fiercer than ever, flanked by her son and daughter-in-law. "This is for the helpers," Eleanor said to the crowd. "The ones who stop in the rain. The ones who see value in what others discard. The ones who restore beauty because they believe broken things deserve to continue." Nora held Adrian's hand tight, her other hand resting on the small swell of her belly where their daughter grew. They'd tell Eleanor after the ceremony. They'd name her Grace, for the grace of a rainy day. For the grace of stopping when others walked past. For the grace of love that saw truth and chose it anyway. Adrian looked at his wife, his mother, the legacy they were building together from kindness and care, and thought about the moment everything changed. A stranger in the rain. A woman who helped without asking for anything. The best thing that ever happened to them. If you made it all the way to the end, please subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. I'd love to hear from you. On a scale of 0 to 10, how did this story make you feel? Drop your rating in the comments. I'll read every single one. I'm truly grateful you're here. See you in the next story.